Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Welcome everybody to episode 6 of the Natural Super Kids podcast. I hope you're enjoying listening to the podcast as much as I am enjoying recording these episodes for you. And if you're a new listener, welcome. We are very early on in the Natural Super Kids podcast journey, but do feel free to go back and listen to the first 5 episodes if you haven't already. Today we are focusing on something I find really interesting and fascinating, which is the hygiene hypothesis and its likely contribution to the huge increase we are seeing in allergies and atopic conditions in our kids, such as eczema, asthma, hay fever. The hygiene hypothesis is also thought to be linked with autoimmune conditions. Autoimmune conditions are not something we talk about a huge amount here at Natural Super Kids, and the reason is because autoimmune conditions generally start to present a bit later in life. However, we are starting to see an increase in the amount of autoimmune conditions that are being diagnosed in our children as well. So any of those conditions that link to an immune system that's a bit confused, and I'll delve into that in a moment, have possibly a link with this hygiene hypothesis. So I'm going to explain that in a moment. You may have heard the term before, but I want to start by talking about allergies, because the rate of children with allergies is skyrocketing, whether they are food allergies, whether they're environmental allergies, whether they're atopic conditions related to allergies that might present as eczema or asthma or hay fever. But we know that these allergies and atopic conditions are increasing at a huge rate among our children. In fact, allergies are the fastest growing health problem here in Australia and the most common health concern among children. So they are a real problem that are affecting the well-being of children and families all over the Western world particularly. And researchers estimate that the number of people with allergies is going to increase by 70% over the next 30 years. That's a huge increase in numbers that are already skyrocketing. So that's really quite scary to think about. And yes, allergies have been around for a long time, but the rate at which we're seeing allergies is much higher than it ever has been before. So in that way, it's a fairly new problem in terms of the amount of people that allergies are impacting. And of course, allergies are a complex issue and there's many factors involved. And one of the things we want to be thinking about is the hygiene hypothesis. So there's no one known cause of allergies. And it means that there's no one clear, one-size-fits-all treatment. However, the strongest argument for an underlying cause, or at least significant contributing factor, is the hygiene hypothesis. And the hygiene hypothesis is a theory that states that a lack of childhood exposure to microbes increases susceptibility to allergies, to atopic conditions such as eczema and asthma, and to autoimmune conditions. So let's just think about the immune system for a moment and what allergies and atopic conditions and even autoimmune conditions are. So the immune system protects us against invasion of microbes, of bacteria, of virus. But the immune system also has a part that regulates, so that sort of tells the body that's not a threat. We don't need to sort of initiate a response to that. For example, when we're eating foods or when we're breathing in dust or pet dander. And when we are talking about allergies to these kinds of things, it is basically the immune system is confused. It's attacking things, or it's initiating a response to things that it shouldn't be. So in, a very simplified way, the immune system needs to learn more about what is safe for the body and what is unsafe for the body. And this is where sort of things go wrong when it comes to allergies and eczema and asthma. And I keep talking about allergies and atopic conditions in one, because atopic conditions have significant allergic component. So eczema, for example, is often triggered by certain foods or environmental substances. It is a condition that affects the skin, but it is, really at the crux of it, eczema is an immune disorder. And it's the same with asthma. There's an allergic component to many of the different types of asthma and eczema that are out there. So I do kind of bundle all of those together, because from a naturopathic perspective, we're looking at eczema and asthma and hay fever and rhinitis and those kind of atopic conditions as an immune disorder. And if we can rebalance the immune system so that it is less reactive to these things that aren't essentially dangerous unless you've got an allergy to them, then that is going to be a good thing. And so when we come back to that hygiene hypothesis, really as a society, we are obsessed with hygiene. And this, in ways that I'm going to talk about, can interfere with the normal development of the immune system. So the immune system learns to respond via exposure to microbes. So when our kids are exposed to microbes, right from the moment they're born, their immune system is being trained on how to respond. But nowadays our kids are exposed to fewer microbes than our generation was, and the generations previously, because of our obsession with hygiene. And the way that our kids are birthed, the way that they are fed, the way that they are raised is much more sanitized than it was even a generation ago. So this means that the immune system doesn't get a proper chance to build, to develop, to learn how to respond appropriately to different things that it comes in contact with, whether that be through the digestive tract, through the airway passages, or any other means. And this also ties in with the development of the microbiome, which I talk so much about. If children aren't exposed to different microbes, they will have a much lower diversity of microbes within the gut. And we know that a low diversity or a lack of diversity within the microbiome of the gut is linked with things like eczema and asthma and allergies and food sensitivities, and even the neurodevelopmental conditions such as autism and ADHD. So the microbiome has a significant role to play in our kids' overall health, and the hygiene hypothesis really does link in with that. So let's have a look at some concrete examples of how our kids' exposure or lack of exposure to microbes happens in the Western world today. And it really starts from the way that our kids are now born and fed from babies. So when our children are now born into very sanitized environments, and yes, in lots of ways, this is, really good. I don't think any of us want to be giving birth onto, a dirty, mucky environment that many women did in the past. But these overly sanitized environments are potentially having a negative impact right from day one. And so, we know that many more babies are born via cesarean section now than via a vaginal delivery. And again, as mums, we are we should be, I know I am very grateful for that being an option for us now. There are much fewer, deaths to both mums and babies while giving birth or while being born these days. So there is a lot to be thankful for, and there are a lot of advances in this area. But when our babies are born via C-section, it does have an impact, as they are not moving through, or they're not sort of making their way through the birth canal, where they pick up lots of beneficial bacteria, and they're exposed to different microbes right from the get-go. And so the increase in the amount of babies born via C-section, the environment in which babies are born into, as well as the fact that many more babies are formula fed these days and not breastfed. Breast milk contains lots of good microbes for building up that healthy microbiome and exposing our kids to different microbes. And so, we can see that right from the get-go, our kids are having less exposure to microbes, which is potentially having an impact on the amount of allergies that we're seeing. Again, I do want to say and remind you that this is only one aspect, and it's a theory. It's that allergies and atopic conditions are very complex. I am by no way saying that this is the only thing at play here, but I do think it's important to bring this to light and to talk about it more. There is also high incidence of antibiotic use in mums and babies. So babies are being exposed to antibiotics that are reducing the microbiome diversity from a very, very early age. And then, if we move on to the food that is available in our world today, the way that the food is grown, the farming practices that are used, pesticides, which are killing microbes, essentially, killing pests. We want, society is asking for that perfect produce that doesn't have any bugs on it, doesn't have any dirt on it. And so that is negatively affecting or reducing exposure to microbes through food, which is something that we do every day, multiple times a day, is eat. Soils are treated in ways that are reducing the microbe exposure that we are getting from the foods that we're eating. The way food is processed, the way our fruits and vegetables are washed, in hygiene washes, using things like chlorine, which are removing or reducing our exposure to microbes through the food that we're eating. Preservatives are added so much more to food these days than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. And of course, preservatives are designed to prolong the shelf life of foods. And so that is reducing microbes within foods, which of course, in some ways is a good thing. But it is one of the factors that's reducing our kids' exposure to microbes, which are so important for developing a healthy immune system. And then we can think of different things and products that we're using within our home, cleaning products and personal care products, many of which contain antibacterial substances. We've got this obsession with hygiene. You watch the ads and mums are led to believe that homes need to be squeaky clean. We need to spray antibacterial cleaning products on all the surfaces. We need to use antibacterial cleaning products on our floors. We need to be sanitizing, with hand washers and hand sanitizers and all sorts of personal care products that have antibacterial substances added to them. And these all add up to reducing our kids' exposure to these all-important microbes that need to happen early on in life to train the immune system to function in a really healthy way. And of course, everything that happened with 2020 and the nasty virus that has been around, hygiene practices have ramped up 1,000%. We're all now using more hand sanitizers and antibacterial products than we probably ever have before. And of course, there are situations and circumstances where this is a really smart thing to do. But I do, wonder and worry a little bit on how this is going to be further affecting particularly young children and the way or the amount of microbes that they're exposed to have a healthy impact on immune development. And when we're also talking about lifestyle, think about our kids and how much more time they're spending in an indoor environment as opposed to an outdoor environment. For all sorts of different reasons, kids are indoors much more, for many more hours every day than they ever have been before. And we know that simply being in an outdoor environment is good for our immune system, is good for that microbe exposure. Playing in the dirt, or even just being in a green space, being the simple act of being outside, enhances or increases our exposure to all kinds of different microbes that we don't get from being in an indoor environment. So it's not one thing and one thing only. As you can see or hear, there are a number of different factors that are all leading to this reduced exposure to microbes in our children. And if we look at the research, we know that kids with pets have a lower incidence of allergies and atopic conditions. And I remember when my son was a baby, my first child, we had a smaller car and we had a puppy. Our dog is a year older than our eldest son. She was our baby before we had children. And we had this small car, and I remember distinctly, we didn't have a kind of an area for the dog at the back. And I remember distinctly my son in his car seat, probably 6 months old, 7 months old. He thought it was the funniest thing to open his mouth while I was driving along. And the dog would lick him furiously all around the mouth, inside the mouth, and he would just laugh his head off. And of course, that is pretty gross in terms of where dogs' mouths have been and what they chew on and that sort of thing. But when we kind of come across those things and witness those things with our kids, it's good to take a deep breath and know that, yes, it might be a bit gross, but it's also really good for that microbe exposure, for the diversity in the gut microbiome, and for reducing the risk of allergies and atopic conditions based on this hygiene hypothesis. So we know that kids that have pets have a lower incidence of allergies and atopic conditions. We know that firstborn children have a higher incidence of allergies, and this is thought to be because they don't have as much exposure through older siblings to different microbes. So it's just really interesting, fascinating research. We also know that children that grow up on farms and are, generally in the outdoor environment a lot more, have a lower incidence of allergies and atopic conditions. So although this doesn't kind of paint the whole picture when it comes to allergies and eczema and asthma, it is definitely something we want to be aware of, we want to think about, particularly if, we're pregnant or we have very young children. We want to try and move away from an obsession with hygiene and keeping our kids squeaky clean, and embrace them getting dirty, them being exposed to different microbes, whether it is through other children, through pets, through outdoor environments. And so I really hope that this kind of changes the way that you think about hygiene and cleanliness for your family, because we're really sort of fighting an uphill battle when you look at the commercials and the messages that we are sold as mums, that we need to buy all of these antibacterial products, personal care products, and cleaning products to keep our families safe, when in fact an overuse of these kinds of things can definitely have the opposite impact and be, increasing the risk of these immune disorders in our children. So I want to finish up by talking you through some action steps that you can take to practice this hygiene hypothesis and to move away from feeling like everything needs to be sanitized and hygienic and squeaky clean, and embrace the mess and the dirt. But before we go into those action steps, I just want to read a little blurb from a book called The Dirt Cure by Maya Shatreat Klein, who is a pediatrician over in the US. It's a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it. It's called The Dirt Cure. And she says, it turns out that all the things that are messy and dirty in the world, the very things we thought we needed to control or even eliminate to stay alive, are actually the very elements necessary for robust health. Research says that bacteria, fungi, parasites, insects, weeds, and living nutrient-dense soil full of all those elements play direct and critical roles in the health of our food, and by extension, the health of our children. Instead of developing new antibiotics, doctors are beginning to treat chronic disease using the opposite approach: bacteria, parasites, soil, even, wait for it, stool. You don't have to be a scientist to know that spending a few hours outside exploring does wonders for any child. We all know that kids thrive when they are connected in all ways to good old-fashioned dirt. Research supports this. Kids who take walks in parks or play in green playgrounds have improved attention spans and better test performance, and are happier and calmer than their peers who spend their time in less natural environments. Spending time in the forest boosts children's immune system function measurably. Dirt and nature reach into children's bodies and minds through their food and play. So again, that book is called The Dirt Cure, and it's by Maya Shatreat Klein, who's a pediatrician over in the US. She's actually an integrative pediatric neurologist. So a very clever lady, but the Dirt Cure is a book that I would highly recommend that kind of delves into this, what we've been talking about today a bit more. So here are my action steps, what I would recommend for you. Number one, and this is an easy one we can all do, and remember, what's good for your own children's immune system and gut health is also good for your own. So let's aim to spend more time outside with our kids. Start with a small achievable goal. Maybe you could, commit to 10 minutes in the back garden, or going for a walk after dinner, or in the afternoon sometime with your kids. Get your kids off the screens that they spend way too much time on, and ourselves off the screens, and simply go for a walk outside, or go to a local park and kick the ball around. On the weekend, make plans to go and have a picnic in a national park, or go for a hike as a family, or go to a nature playground. Do spend more time outside. If you do this one thing and one thing only, your family's health will benefit tremendously. Mental health, physical health, stress management. Spending more time outside is good for us in so many ways, including this exposure to different microbes that are so beneficial to our immune system and our gut microbiome. Number two is look at the ways that you are using cleaning products in the house, and think about reducing your use of particularly antibacterial substances. Remember, anything that's antibacterial is going to have a negative effect on the bacteria within the microbiome. So I'm not saying never use these products. There's certainly a time and a place for antibacterial products, but your home surfaces do not all have to be treated with antibacterial chemicals regularly. So think about your use of antibacterial chemicals and use them sparingly in both cleaning products and personal care products. Number 3 is look at where you're sourcing your food for your family. As I said, commercial food is grown in a certain way, is processed in a certain way, is treated in a certain way that is not great in terms of the exposure to different microbes that we can get through food that we eat. Shopping at the farmer's market, or ordering an organic box of produce online, or going to a local farm to source some healthier grown food is always going to be a good thing. Now, I'm a big fan of farmers markets, so if you have a farmers market local to you, I would highly recommend getting at least some of your produce from the farmers market, because it is generally grown more locally to you and in a much healthier way than the big commercial farms will use. So think about the way the way that you're sourcing your food and how you can change that, even if it's, just one little change each week. But definitely think about that. And then I do have a 4th action step for you, and it is to download our free Gut Health for Kids ebook. I'm going to put the link in the show notes, and this talks about the analogy, or I use the analogy of a gut health garden and how we can really help to look after our kids' gut health. And a big part of that is thinking about ways to expose our kids to a variety of microbes in a healthy way that can really help to develop a nice, healthy, robust, well-balanced immune system. So the link to the Kids Gut Health ebook is in the show notes. It's totally free, and I think you will find it really valuable in terms of some practical steps that you can take based on the information that I've shared in today's podcast. I'd love to know what you think about this, whether it's challenged some of your beliefs. Let me know. And definitely leave us a review on iTunes if you can, or send me a DM on Instagram and let me know what you think. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. We're Natural Super Kids on Instagram. Thank you so much, guys. I will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.